My name is Simon Darnell. I work at the University of Toronto in the Faculty of Kinesiology and Physical Education. And I'm here today to talk about a paper that I first wrote for the ISSA Graduate Student Paper Award, which I was fortunate enough to win in 2005. The paper started as a project for a PhD seminar that I was involved with. Taught by Professor Shireen Razik at the University of Toronto. And Professor Razik was the first scholar to introduce me to post-colonial theory, to studies of whiteness, to studies of racialized subjectivity. And at that point in my career, I was very much becoming interested in the relationship between sports and international development. And I was beginning to look at it from a number of different angles. But I would say at that stage, I was still fairly focused on relatively normative questions around sport for development, like does it work and can sport make a positive contribution to international development? Questions that I still think are really important, but it was Professor Razik who encouraged me to start to think more deeply and broadly as well, and more critically about the social and historical implications and the politics, frankly, of using sport in the service of international development. And she encouraged me to think about what kind of subjectivities were being created and maintained and privileged when we think about sports in relation to international development. So that led me to start poking around, and I ended up on the website at the time for Right to Play, one of the largest non-governmental organizations focused on sport for development in the world. And I began to read some of the testimonials of their international volunteers and the stories that they were telling about why this work was important to them and what was happening to them as a result of their experience and participation in promoting and delivering sport programs around the world. And that was when I really started to notice what Professor Razik had encouraged me to start looking for, which is that in these testimonials about the importance of sports on an international scale and sport for development, it was actually the people that were delivering the programs who seemed to be having the most significant experience. They were talking very much about their own development. And when they did talk about the people that they were ostensibly serving, they still seemed to create something of a hierarchy in the relationships. So they would talk in those testimonials about how much it stood out that the people that they were serving were grateful for their presence, right? Local people were grateful that the international volunteers had come to do these sports programs. And so when I started to read those kind of testimonials through this post-colonial theory, it encouraged me to think about the ways in which whiteness was both a precursor to international volunteering, and then also when combined with sport, that whiteness was being solidified, reified, and substantiated, one might say, through these experiences. And that led me to start to ask questions about subjectivity and how subjectivities were maintained and created, especially subjectivities and subject positions of whiteness. All of that then went into the term paper for that course, which I then in turn edited and modified and sent into the ISSA Graduate Student Paper Award. The paper was fortunate to win the award, and then I went on to publish it in Sport and Society. And honestly, I would say that of all the things that I've written, in the nearly 20 years since then, it's this particular paper that's always garnered the most response. It's the one that seems to have been the most provocative for people. It's the one that's maybe been the most controversial. And I think it's because it does touch a particular nerve, which is that when we think about sports and our desire to help, especially on an international scale, and particularly when we cross lines of geography and race and class, that desire to help is very powerful, but it's also not one that we want to admit to very often because it says something about us as privileged people that we might not feel comfortable talking about. So that's the genesis of the paper. That's how it came to be. And I think that's in many ways its legacy is that it asked some uncomfortable questions and proposed some uncomfortable theses about what sport for development means for the people that are delivering programs. And I would say that there are three other takeaways that I might offer that are related to this paper and its legacy. One is to think about sport for development not just as a technical process. I mean, it is in some cases. If you're going to deliver an international sports program to meet some non-sport goals, it's going to have some technical aspects to it. But what goes alongside of that is that sport for development and peace has significant social implications and political implications. And we, as scholars, as people who care about sports, and as people who study sports, I think we're in the best position, and in some cases, have something of an ethical responsibility to think about the social implications of sports when we mobilize it on an international scale. So, as much as this paper was about race and whiteness specifically, I think it's also pointing us towards the importance of thinking about the social implications of mobilizing sport for development. The second thing I would sort of offer as a takeaway is that sports for development is political, and it's beholden to development politics, because in some ways, what the post-colonial perspective asks us to think about, and what I was sort of tapping into in that early version of the paper and then through to its publication, are the long-standing development politics that have underpinned international development at least since the late 1940s. And then earlier than that as well in more traditional colonial politics. So my point here is that as much as we like to think of sports as a neutral activity, when connected to international development, it becomes politicized. And I think we have a responsibility to embrace those politics and investigate them and think about their implications. And then the final takeaway I would offer is that sport for development is always about the people that are organizing the programs, the people that are delivering them, the people that are receiving them, so-called, the people that are resisting them. There is a tendency, I think, sometimes to somehow concentrate on sports as if it's some kind of reified or technical element of the SDP phenomenon. Whereas I would encourage us to keep coming back to thinking about the people that are involved in SDP. What's happening to those people? Who are they? Why have they come to this work? What are they learning? What are they not learning? How are they being challenged? Or, in some cases, how are their privileges being reified, sustained, maintained? And then where might the opportunities be for us to think about ways to deconstruct privilege in those relationships? So that's my recap. Those are my memories of this paper, and thank you to the ISSA for asking me to reflect on it. And I'm glad that the paper still has a legacy, and I hope that it continues to provoke thought in the best sense of the word, in the best sense of the sociology of sports. Thanks a lot.